the 80th anniversary of the United Nations General Assembly, the President of Ghana, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, delivered a powerful Pan-African speech that left the entire assembly mesmerized and got the whole world talking about him. Today, we will dive into the details of his speech and the important historical references that he made that won the hearts of many Africans and Black people across the globe and actually won him the title of the favorite African president as we speak. But before that, greetings to you wherever you are watching me from and welcome to my channel. If you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss any future interesting videos like this on my channel. Without much ado, let's listen to the brave, confident, and conscious, proud African giant and president of the Republic of Ghana, deliver his memorable speech that left the entire assembly at the United Nations 80th anniversary actually mesmerized.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Wow. What do you say about his dressing? All right, first things first, whether you like it or not, people would judge you based on how you dress. And the way you dress says a lot about you, about your history, about your origin, and about your culture. And you actually send a lot of message, okay, through your code of dressing. So, based on these facts, the way he's dressed is representative of the Ghanaian culture and the African culture. All right. Smoke is one of our favorites as Ghanaians, and it is one of our prestigious and decent uh, dressing code. All right. So I give him 10 out of 10 for that. All right. Smoke is not only just one in Ghana, it's also one in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and many other African countries. All right. So his code of dressing showcases his cultural and historical consciousness as an African, as a Ghanaian, and as a leader. All right. So this is very, very important to note. But let's listen to him speak now.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At this 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, I'd like to speak about Africa's role in the future of this organization. However, it's impossible to do that without first considering the collective role that Africa played in its founding, which was small and relatively insignificant. Of the 51 member states involved in the founding of the United Nations in 1945, only 4 were African: Egypt, Ethiopia, Liberia, and South Africa. It is important to point out that the United Nations came into being in the aftermath of World War II because of the inability of its predecessor, the League of Nations, to avert a large-scale global conflict, which had been its guiding purpose when it was founded in 1920 at the end of the First World War. Out of the 42 founding member states of the League of Nations, only 3 were African: Liberia, the Union of South Africa, and Ethiopia. Egypt was to join later in 1937. Africa's overall participation in the organization's founding was minimal and relatively unimportant. That's because before all the other talks and meetings, representatives from a group of 14 nations gathered in Berlin for a series of discussions that began in 1884 and which led to the partitioning and formal colonization of the African continent, which is also called the Scramble for Africa.
Otherwise known as the Berlin Conference, all right? You know, led by, is it von Bismarck or something, right? And it was held in Germany. That was uh, the beginning of African colonization, right? It was during this period that they demarcated Africa into its modern day countries. All right. These borders that we identify by today were actually artificially created during the Berlin conference in Germany. All right. You know, for the colonial demarcation of Africa to serve Europe's imperial agenda. All right.
It has famously been written that past is prologue. Well, in the past, the majority of the 54 nations that now comprise Africa were never offered a seat at the table where plans for a new world order were being drawn. But, Madam President, as fate would have it, the tables are turning, and Africa's role in the authorship of whatever is yet to come for this world is going to be huge, and it will be consequential. According to this organization's own projections, by the year 2050, more than 25% of the world's population is expected to come from the African continent. Additionally, by 2050, 1/3 of all young people aged between 15 to 24 will be residing on the African continent.
No wonder a lot of Western leaders are actually obsessed with the African population. You know, they attribute Africa's underdevelopment to its large population. Meanwhile, there are countries that are way, way, way more populated, okay, and smaller in uh, in sizes compared to Africa. As a matter of fact, Africa is a continent and a very big continent that is bigger than Europe as a continent, okay, excluding Russia, for instance. If you have to take Russia out of Europe, the whole of Western Europe can get into Africa, including the whole of US can be fixed into Africa. That should tell you about how big Africa is. So Africa has enough land for its kids, its population, all right? And as a matter of fact, if you look at Europe and even, yeah, let's speak about Europe, for instance, the population is in decline. They are in demographic crisis. That is why they are in need of even immigrants. Okay, though they criticize, immigrants and what and what and what and what. If not, why do they welcome them? And why are they not addressing the issues back home? Okay, about um, dictatorship in some African countries that are actually maintained in power by the West because they, serve their interest to the detriment of their own people. Why are they not concerned about those? Why are they not concerned about that aspect of things? All right. Why are they not concerned about the unfavorable geopolitical environment that they have created, to sabotage African developmental process? and just sabotage our economic contributions to the world and everything. They don't want us to industrialize. They just want us to keep giving out raw materials and be buying the finished products so they can continue to call us poor. He's going to mention all these things in his speech.
So you see, the future of this world is African. Allow me to say this once again a little louder for those of you in the back. The future is African. Already today, Africa is a catalyst for human potential and development, as well as for economic reform and ecological stability. Africa is a catalyst for systemic change. If this reality, which is fact-based and straightforward, seems provocative or unsettling, perhaps it's because you are viewing it through the lens of centuries of filters, colonialism and imperialism,
Yes.
and the resulting implicit bias. Maybe you are unaware of the resilience of African nations or their remarkable ability to make a strong comeback just when you think it's safe to count them out. That is what is happening right now in my own country, Ghana. Our constitution limits leaders to 2 4-year terms. In January, I was sworn in for a second term, which, let me point out, was non-consecutive with my first term. Our currency, the Ghana cedi, was rapidly depreciating, faced with rising inflation, a huge debt burden, and low morale amongst our citizens. My new administration settled down quickly and embarked on an ambitious program of comprehensive transformation designed to restructure Ghana's economic foundation and enhance our competitive standing globally. We refer to this process of recalibration as our reset agenda. In just 8 months, we have achieved significant reduction in inflation from 23.8% in December 2024 to 11.5% in August 2025, restoring price stability for our citizens. Additionally, our currency, the Ghana cedi, has appreciated considerably against other currencies, with Bloomberg reporting it as the best performing currency in the world at one point. Our improved sovereign credit rating reflects increasing investor confidence in our economy. And our 24-hour economy initiative promises to transform our economy. And there's a renewed willingness amongst our people to trust that their elected officials have Ghana's interests at heart and that we're progressing together. Madam President, I believe that in honor of this milestone celebration, the United Nations should also embark on a process of serious recalibration and establish its own reset agenda. Since the organization's founding, the number of UN member nations has nearly quadrupled. And quite frankly, it is not the same world that it was back then when the UN was formed. I mentioned earlier that I began my second non-consecutive term as president this past January. My first term ended in January 2017. In that span of time, 8 years, the world has changed with such ferocity. My first days in office after my return felt as though I had just awakened from a Rip Van Winkle-style sleep. Now, no, that was only after 8 years. Imagine then what it will be like after 80 years since the founding of the United Nations. In 1945, the sun had not yet set on the largest empire in history. The most common mode of international travel was by sea. The personal computer had not been invented, let alone made portable. And television, a new convenience, was still in its infancy, albeit in black and white color. Relations between the US and the Soviet Union were turning frosty, with Winston Churchill declaring that an iron curtain has descended across the European continent. Fast track 80 years on, in today's world, hundreds of thousands of commercial flights take off and land every day. Libraries have been digitized so that volumes of literature can exist on a small device, small enough to fit inside your pocket. We live in a world of cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, social media, the internet and its dark hidden dungeon of the dark web, all of which carry a potential threat to global peace and security. Climate change is real, and we're fighting a losing battle against the loss of Maldives and other island nations to the rising sea level, against the loss of Timbuktu to desertification and the Amazon forest to global warming and deforestation. Madam President, the UN Founding Charter is outdated when it comes to representation in this August Assembly. The most powerful post-World War II nations are still being rewarded with an almost totalitarian guardianship over the rest of the world. And yet, the first sentence in Chapter 2, Article 1 of the UN Charter declares that the organization is based on the principle of sovereign equality of all its members. If this were true, and was the case, a continent as large as Africa, with its numerous UN member states, would have at least one permanent seat on the Security Council. Furthermore, we believe that veto power should not be restricted to only 5 nations, nor should it be absolute. There must be a mechanism in this House for the General Assembly to challenge a veto. No single nation should be able to exercise an absolute veto to serve its own interests in a dispute. In 1995, during the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, Nelson Mandela stood in this very spot, and he said, the United Nations has to reassess its role, redefine its profile, and reshape its structures. It should truly reflect the diversity of our universe and ensure equity among the nations in the exercise of power within the system of international relations in general and the Security Council in particular.
I mean, how could we talk of United Nations? How could we say the UN is about all nations? It was founded based on equality of nations, you know, yet some nations are underrepresented or some continents are underrepresented. Veto power is only given to some specific countries, but no African country even has a veto power. Now, what does it say about this organization as we speak? It means that I remember Robert Mugabe said the same thing. There need to be a reform of the Security Council. They need to be this, they need to be that.
The bosses in the Security Council say you shall never have the powers that we have as permanent members. And we have asked and asked and asked and asked and asked. Reform the Security Council.
Then he has a veto power. What is veto power? How could we talk about, I mean, then in that case, the UN is about those countries and not just about the world. Until there is a reform, I don't think Africans should even believe in it, in this organization, if it doesn't serve our interest. You know.
Those quotations. 30 years later, we African leaders are still making the same simple request.
But I'm not even surprised if they are saying the UN was formed because its predecessor, which is the League of Nations, couldn't achieve long-lasting world peace. So after World War II, the UN was formed. Ask yourself, World War II was fought by which countries? Should we even call it World War II? Did Africa pick a fight on any, or in history, has Africa ever picked a fight against any European country? Has Africa ever colonized or invaded or enslaved people of any country? No. Has Africa ever made weapons of mass destruction and attacked any country of any kind in the world? No. During the so-called World War II, which is just like uh, an ethnic conflict of Europe, or yeah, let's call it that way, an ethnic conflict of Europe involved by what the Europeans themselves on the European continent and the European in the Americas, called the United States today, and the Soviet Union, or was it Russia? Yeah, Soviet Union or Russia, whatever. That is an ethnic conflict of theirs, but they call it World War II. Africa was never concerned. So they are making a, first of all, World War II shouldn't have been called World War II or World War One, because not all continents or not all nations were participating in that war. Neither did they have any interest in fighting, neither did they start any kind of that war. Secondly, if the United Nations was formed to address those needs, then they should have called it post World War II. It's not even post World War II, post European ethnic conflict peace organization or peace treaty or whatever, instead of calling it the United Nations. Because as he is saying it currently as we speak, it is not representative of its governing power. The Security Council and whatnot is not representative of the world at large. You know, Africa is excluded. Do we have to keep begging? If we are not part of it, let's not just. I mean, a time should come, African leaders should stop attending. What is the point?
For a permanent seat on the Security Council with the power of a veto. So today, Madam President, I stand here in this exact spot and ask the world, if not now, then when? We demand not only a reform of the Security Council, but also a reset of the global financial architecture, which is currently rigged against Africa. Africa must have a greater say in the world's multilateral financial institutions. And while I'm making requests, I'd like to call for the removal of the blockade on Cuba. As Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, our nation's founder, famously said, we seek to be friends with all and enemies to none. The Cuban people shed their blood on African soil in the fight against apartheid. And indeed, Cuba has been and continues to be a faithful friend of Africa.
Absolutely. These are some of the important historical references that he's making, all right? Nelson Mandela also said a similar thing. He said, one big mistake that the West make is often to think that their enemies must be our enemies and their friends must be our friends. The sole reason why they don't like Cuba is because Cuba is anti-imperialist. So similarly, Russia or the then Soviet Union was also what, anti-imperialist. He hasn't mentioned Russia here, but or the Soviet Union here role in liberation of Africa, but the Soviet Union or today's Russia, as well as Cuba, have always been what these two countries have always been friendly towards Africa, and they have always supported us through our independence struggles. All right.
You see, the very fact that I can stand here and ask these things and say these things, and the fact that all nations can ostensibly gather here to address critical global issues, air our grievances, and express our concerns, that is what makes the survival of this organization so important. In every old city or village, you will find a town
Excuse me
square
for that.
or a courtyard or a plaza that once served as a gathering space for the citizens of the community and their leaders. Meetings and celebrations were held there, as were trials and elections. And these were spaces that brought people together and held them together as a community. Sadly, time and technology have eroded these spaces. Madam President, in many ways, the United Nations is the proverbial town square of our modern global village. And it has never been more critical for us to protect this one space that brings and holds the world nations together as a community. The internet, social media platforms, and artificial intelligence offer us the illusion of connectivity, when in fact what they do is reinforce isolation by using algorithms that ensure that we do not receive new ideas and perspectives, but rather more of the same content. We are served alternative facts and manipulated images, making it easy to disseminate disinformation and sow seeds of division amongst communities. Madam President, these are dangerous times. Our world is currently experiencing a rise in nationalism and economic instability. There's a general breakdown of multilateralism. Various acts of aggression have been committed against the sovereignty of others, and nations are attempting to circumvent the very safeguards that were put in place to prevent large-scale global conflict. These conditions are all too similar to the ones that led to the League of Nations' failure in fulfilling its mandate. The denial of visas to President Abbas and the Palestinian delegation sets a bad precedent and should be deeply worrying to all member nations of the United Nations. Ghana recognized the state of Palestine in 1988 and supported a two-state solution to the conflict since then. And I say, contrary to the claims of some, a two-state solution would not be a reward for Hamas. It would rather be a reprieve for the hundreds of thousands of innocent women and children and people who are facing collective punishment and forced starvation for no reason other than the fact that they are Palestinian. For nearly 2 years and for the fear of reprisals, we here in this General Assembly have been playing hide and seek with language to find the right words to help us avoid or excuse what we all know is taking place in Gaza. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter what you call it. If it looks like a duck, it swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, well, then it must be a duck. The crimes in Gaza must stop. The crimes in Gaza must stop. Madam President, I also want to draw particular attention to the conflict in Sudan, which this body has described as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. 12 million people have had to flee their homes. And when we speak of migration, we refer to the 12 million new Sudanese refugees, whom we as a global community should be willing to assist in much the same way that many member nations readily assisted new refugees coming out of Ukraine. Let's dispense with the euphemism.
Absolutely. You see that nobody talks about the Sudanese crisis. Nobody talks about the Congolese crisis. But those crises have existed for years, all right? People, millions of people are dying, but nobody cares. Nobody, they make it seem as if we are just fighting among ourselves. I mean, I'm not a Congolese, but I'm an African. They just make it seem like, oh, Africans are just in the jungle. They just fight each other. They just, But where do those people, those rebels in the Congo, DRC, where do they get those weapons from? Where do they get those ammunitions from? You see? So that explains why they are silent about it.
And dog whistles and speak frankly. It is not a mystery that when leaders of Western nations complain of their migration problems, they are often referring to immigrants from the global south. But many of those immigrants are climate refugees. And interestingly, the global north emits 75% more greenhouse gases than the global south. However, the effects of climate change are more severe in the global south because we lack the resources to address them effectively. And so when the desert encroaches on our villages and towns and they become unlivable, we are forced to flee. Warsan Shire, a Somali-born prophet, a Somali British poet, born in Kenya to Somalian refugee parents, was London's first youth poet laureate. She writes in her poem titled Home, and it says, "You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one bends their palms under trains beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck feeding on newspaper unless the miles traveled mean something more than just a journey." Madam President, we cannot normalize cruelty. We cannot normalize hatred. We cannot normalize xenophobia and racism. If we're going to tell a story, let's not tell it slant. Let's tell all the truth. When we speak of migrants, we speak of Mami Ewusi Mensah Frimpong, a judge on the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. She's the first black female judge on any of California's 4 federal district courts. She was born here in America to immigrant parents from Ghana. We speak of Peter Bosman, a medical doctor in Ghana who moved to the town of Piran in Slovenia in the 1980s and later became the first black mayor of Piran, the first black mayor in Slovenia and in the whole of Eastern Europe. We speak of T. Michael, the iconic Ghanaian Norwegian artist and designer. And of course, we speak of the late Kofi Annan, former United Nations Secretary General.
Not only that, okay, think about the different contributions of African Americans, all right? A lot of scientists, there are a lot of the light bulb is thanks to who? A black person. Is it Latimer or Luis Latimer or something? I can't pronounce his name well, but he was an African, a black man. All right, there are many, many inventions. The toilet, what there are different inventions that were done by what black people. All right, so our contributions are enormous. You see, but just like one of my favorite artists sings, Mr. Ligi, Griffith Jr. from Trinidad, all right, based in New York. He's one of my favorite artists. He sings, Babylon are using us, but they are refusing us. Babylon using we, and then refusing we. We need a more unity, worldwide African unity. But that is it. Babylon uses us, but they refuse us, they deny us. We don't have to continually seek acceptance. We just have to build our own. It's as simple as that. And where we will have an issue with them is the fact that they don't want us to build our own. They want to keep on calling us poor, but they want to keep what? Taking our minds, taking our resources, and taking everything from us, and want to dictate how we should be, who should be our friend, who should be our enemy. That isn't good, you see.
Former United Nations Secretary General and Nobel Peace Prize recipient, who was born in Ghana but spent his adulthood in various places in America and Europe. These are people who have brought great distinction to the countries that they decided to call home. Just as the migrants and the children of migrants before them did, I dare say these are not invaders. These are not criminals. Madam President, the slave trade must be recognized as the greatest crime against humanity. As the African champion on reparations, Ghana intends to introduce a motion in this August body to that effect. More than 12.5 million Africans were forcibly taken against their will and transported to create wealth for the powerful Western nations.
The sad part of it is that they don't even admit nor discuss some of these cruel things that happened. Slave trade, Atlantic slave trade that took away millions of Africans. These millions of Africans went to build what? Europe and the Americas, right? Do they admit these atrocities? Do they even apologize these atrocities? No. So for me, sometimes I ask myself, what is the point trying to ask somebody for mercy if this person is not showing you humility or mercy? Like how do you forcefully ask? You cannot demand that from somebody. You cannot ask for mercy, but you can demand respect. And I think what he's doing is that he's demanding respect. So if all these people that were taken to your countries to build your countries forcefully taken, you have no problem with what you have inherited. Even after the abolition of slave trade, the slave owners were what compensated for their loss of their products, as if we were actually products that were sold. Our ancestors were like products that were sold, but we were never given any reparations. Which means, do they even consider our humanity? And I'm not surprised. Think about Sarah Batman that was kept in what human zoos, exposed. Her nudity was exposed for people to watch and pay. So people that have a history of dehumanizing us, why should we constantly think one day they would see us otherwise? But that's not because they are not aware of our humanity. It's simply because they want to intimidate us, they want to dominate us, they want to subjugate us. So they have erased our culture, they have erased our history. They say we never contributed to history, and then we just have to follow, you know, their ways of living, their everything, their ways of governance, democracy. We have countries that are prosperous and they are not democracies. Why must they impose their models onto us? Why can't we start forging ways, and why can't we start designing models uh, and systems of governance that reflect our own realities and our own aspirations based on the visions of our own ancestors? Why? Why must we live to glorify another human being or glorify another group of people? Why must we live to serve them? So if we are constantly seeking that they just leave us alone, they don't want, then we have to demand it. You mustn't like me, but you must respect me. So that's what he's saying.
We must demand reparations for the enslavement of our people and the colonization of our land that resulted in the theft of our natural resources, as well as the looting of artifacts and other items of cultural heritage that have yet to be returned in total.
This, I think, we have a problem to play here. I mean, we are part of the problem here. The looted artifacts and those things, I always ask myself, today as we speak, most of our leaders are not even practicing African traditions and African spirituality. So, what is the point? For instance, he's speaking here. I so much love him and I admire his confidence and I admire what he's saying. But I know for a fact that he's a Christian, all right? He's not a traditionalist, he's not an authentic African. Spiritually, he's not a pure African. He's his faith is what? The Christian faith, the faith of the colonizers. Just as some Africans are either Muslims, which is also a foreign religion, and remind you, the what do they call it? The Arab slavery lasted thousands of years before even the European slavery. So it's not by mistake that some Africans what uh, Arabic, or some Africans speak whatever. Uh, some Africans, like most African countries, are either Muslims or Christians. Traditional African practitioners are very few. So if leaders who make these remarks, they themselves are not even practicing the African faith, then How will they take us serious? How will you call yourself a Catholic, an Assemblies of God, a Jehovah Witness, or what and what and what, a Muslim and whatnot, and come and speak about our artifacts? Those artifacts were not just artifacts; those were what divinities. All right, they had spiritual meanings. That is our tradition. That is our spirituality. That's what was taken in actuality. So we don't just want those artifacts like those artifacts are just. Do you think it's by mistake that they took them? They took them to disarm us spiritually. All right. They didn't take them because they are just artifacts, because they are just beautiful, they are just arts. No. They know the significance of what they took. If not, is it so difficult to recarve those things? If we were practicing our faith or African spirituality as a people, would it be difficult to recarve all those artifacts that they took? We still have some of the best woodworkers and whatever who can carve all those artifacts. But carving them, will it come still with the same spiritual meaning? No. Why? Because it's not just a matter of carving it, but it's a matter of the spirit behind what you're doing. So our traditions, our culture, and our spirituality has been broken simply not because they took those artifacts. Our ancestors are spirits. Those spirits are molded in the form of those physical divinities that we create. But those spirits live within us. So we can keep practicing, we can keep creating more of those artifacts if we want. But we simply talk about it, but we still practice the culture of the colonizers. Why? How will they respect us if leaders don't follow? If they don't do that, then like how do you want us to give us those divinities so we can go and put them in our museums for people to just go and watch, and then we go back to churches? Aren't we making mockery of ourselves? Just like Jomo Kenyatta said, they came, they gave us the Bible to pray. As we close our eyes to pray, they took our lands, they took our gold, they took our diamonds, and now we are left with the Bible.
We recognize the value of our land and the value of our lives, as did our colonizers, as well as the governments that happily paid reparations to former slave owners as compensation for the loss of their property, in quotes. And that property for which they received compensation was, for which compensation was paid, referred to enslaved people who had been freed. Madam President, an increasingly insecure world is witnessing upward spending on defense budgets of bilateral partners and steep cuts in official development assistance. Since July 2024, it is estimated that there's been a 40% drop in humanitarian aid globally. In this era of global uncertainty, Africa must exercise sovereignty over its natural resources to raise the necessary funds to ensure the well-being of its citizens. The days of parceling out vast concession areas to foreign interests for exploitation must come to an end.
We don't even want aid in the first place. We don't want humanitarian aid. How could we be the richest continent? Everybody's taking from us, and then we are the ones asking for aid. Does it make any sense? We have to start building industries, and that is not the responsibility of the West. Of course, they have a responsibility because they always topple any leader at all who wants to do good for Africa. Gaddafi, Patrice Lumumba, Nkrumah, name them. Even Traore today, he's not safe. All right. So that is one thing. They don't want to leave us alone. If not, we have brains. We are not, I mean, like there's nothing at all that we can't do. Is it engineering? Is it what? But it's our duty, as he speaking as a leader, it's their duty, the African and everybody, it's our collective duty to make sure that our talents are used to benefit our people. All right. Our resources are used to benefit our people. We can start with our own engineering. We don't have to copy other people's models. We cannot try to want to be like Europe when we never colonized any country. We cannot try to be like America when we never had any enslaved any people. There's no need doing that. But we can make use of our talents, our local engineers like Kantanka in Ghana, who is an automobile engineer, self-taught engineer. We can make use of some of these people to start creating our local industries. It doesn't matter whoever, whatever any person says about our products, but we believe in our products. Tomorrow the world will respect us. Toyota did not just start as Toyota. No, they started somewhere. Ford did not start just as Ford. They started somewhere. When China started their manufacturing, everybody would make mockery. Oh, Chinese phone, Chinese phone, Chinese phone. Today, as we speak, this mic was probably assembled in China. I'm not sure. This television, I know it's a Chinese product. All right. Asus is a Chinese product. The keyboard is Chinese product. The mouse is a Chinese product. We can do same. We just have to believe in what we produce. We have to believe in our culture. But we try to be spiritually, culturally, historic, everything of us, we try to be other people. Mentally, we are not on our own. So um, how then do we develop ourselves? Because we don't have a vision of our own. If you are following other people and these people are not accepting you as part of them, then it means they can control you because you are seeking acceptance. They can tell you to be this and you accept to be that.
We'll continue to welcome foreign investment, but we must negotiate better for a bigger share of the natural resources that belong to us. And we must insist on value addition to these resources. We're tired of the continued image of poverty-stricken, disease-ridden rural communities living at the periphery of huge foreign-controlled natural resource concession areas. We're tired of having people extract the most they can from us and in return offer us the very least by way of respect.
What he just said is the story of the Congo, right? Places like I think it's Goma or wherever in the DRC that are highly unstable, you know, with the foreign funded rebel groups destabilizing all these areas, actually areas that are highly rich in what resources, you see, and these people are displaced. Nobody talks about those crises. Millions of people are fleeing, thousands and millions are dying. Nobody talks about that.
Consideration and dignity. We're tired of not being represented in ways that reveal the richness and complexity of our history or acknowledge all that we have overcome to arrive here in this liminal space of untold possibilities. Allow me to echo the Indian-American writer Arundhati Roy, who wrote, "Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her briefing." I want to add that for the sake of Africa, and quite selfishly for the sake of my 18-year-old daughter, I hope that this new world that is arriving is a place of safety and equality for women and girls. To succeed, we must empower everyone, including women and girls, to reach their full potential. In closing, Madam President, I'd like to congratulate you on your election to preside over this historic 80th General Assembly and on being the 5th woman to hold this distinction. I'd also like to congratulate Her Excellency Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman on being the first woman Vice President of Ghana. Now every Ghanaian girl knows the heights to which she can ascend. Words matter, but issues of representation matter even more. which is why Ghana looks forward to the appointment of a woman as Secretary General of this organization in the near future. Madam President, Your Excellencies, I thank you for your kind attention.
All right, there you have it. His candid speech, backed by, like I said, history. And I really admire his confidence, all right? And while all that he said is on point, you see, but most often leaders would make uh, these speeches. I'm not saying he's actually a highly performing president for our republic, and uh, as a Ghanaian, I can't speak for everybody, but most of us are proud. Most of the youth, we are beginning, like he said, to have hope in our political system. Because there are some successes and milestones that he has achieved just in his short term of presidency. All right, like getting the exchange rate reducing from it used to be 16 or 17, sometimes 18, now to like 14 or 15. We hope, yeah, it gets better and better and better. And also reducing inflation and all of that. He has done well, all right. But in terms of infrastructure, I know he cannot just do everything within this small time space, but we need more of these. We need more practical steps to help develop Africa. We still have a lot of, in rural areas in Ghana, we still have students sitting under trees. We still have, uh, some people unable, in the villages, unable to have access to healthcare. We still have different issues. We have like poor road construction, a lot of accidents happening. We have a lot of unemployment, right? And many more, simply because we are not industrialized. We keep giving our resources out so they can turn back and call us that we are poor. And then we remain uh, underdeveloped, and we are not industrialized. So how do we create jobs? So we have a lot of unemployment. Some of us speaking here, if I had a job, a well-paying job, tomorrow in Ghana, I'm going to go home. There's no place like home. I miss our food. I miss everything Ghana. You see, the weather and everything. But the youth, are beginning to have hope in him. In our political system and whatnot. So he's doing well, and we want more of these pragmatic actions and not just speech or speeches. But he did so well, and his speech was on point. And personally, he won my heart, and I think he won the hearts of many Africans and Black people across the world. So we love you, John Mama, and keep up with the good work. We're proud of you. Let me know in the comment section what you think, and take care, and bye for now.